Estêvão Raschietti è un missionario severiano d'origine italiana.
Works in Brazil since 1990 and has been working for 30 years at least. He studied Missiology at São Paulo and then got a PhD in theology at the Pontifical Catholic University of Paraná, where he wrote his doctoral thesis on mission and decolonization. Currently, he is a professor at the Theological Study Curitiba, Paraná, in Brazil, and he is involved in missionary animation, particularly in the Brazilian Bishops' Conference. He's also director of the Cultural Center Conforti in Curitiba. Raschietti. Good morning. It's a great honor to be part of this important event of the missionaries of the SVD, where I feel at home. We've known each other for Christophe. We've known each other for a very long time. There's Joachim too. And we swap cards in Curitiba. Fernando, Joachim were in the commission which assessed my doctoral thesis. So if I say something wrong, it's their fault. So once I've assigned some responsibilities, let's start. Now you can see a figure there. There's a famous picture by a Uruguayan artist, Joaquin Torre Garcias, who drew Latin America upside down to express a way of being. Of Latin Americans and a way of reasoning where the magnetic pole is in the south, not in the north. What does postmodernity mean below the equator? It's the same thing, but it's seen in a very different way. And as you see on the background, the Christ the Redemptor from Rio de Janeiro, because when the missionaries go to Rio de Janeiro, Jesus is already there to greet them with his arms open. So we could say also beyond the colonial mission, so we put mission at Gentes to add some continuity and discontinuity. Now, why this? The Pope said so. Christianity is over. Once it was easier to distinguish between two clear aspects. On the one hand, the Christian world, and on the other, the non-Christian world. Now this situation no longer exists, and we need other maps, other paradigms to help us to reposition our ways of thinking and our ways of and our attitudes. So with the end of Christianity, we also come to the end of a mode of missionary activity with ecclesiology, salvation, ecclesiology, salvific central ecclesiology, the jurisdiction of propaganda fide, and the colonization of the West. So now we have to see another reality. All ecclesial circles have to see a missionary pastoral conversion which cannot leave things as they are. This also involves the missionary institutions. The old approach of Missio ad Gentes is now over. Who helped us? What helped us was certainly the Council. Council was the watershed for a new vision of mission, which we, at 60 years from the end of the Council, can also have a new reception and see, in light of these decades, what's happened in missiological reflection. There are 7 perspectives I would select which can help us to see mission in another way, between tradition and innovation, in a continuity of factors and with items of discontinuity. The first definitely is mission as essence. We've spoken of Missio Dei. Before defining mission as an activity, the Council rediscovered it as the essence of the Church. The Church, by its nature, is missionary, an essence which derives from the love of the Father and a strictly theological consideration. God is mission, relation, kinship. God is love. And therefore, a missionary approach is not the spread of a single true religion, but love which looks for its people, comes down from heaven and Missio Dei. Mission as a ministry. I don't think there's any Missio Dei without being able to communicate it. Lumen Gentium had already approached a distinction between the kingdom and the church, seeing the latter as the kingdom of God already present in the mystery, and the conviction is reached finally that the church is not an end to itself, but is in the service of is in the service, and this kingdom is something which we found beyond the boundaries of the church. Paul VI said, in order that the mystery of love of God is spread in the world, the ministry of love of man is required, accepting the ministry of communicating that mystery to people, ministry. Thirdly, ministry as hearing, as listening. The Council turning point wanted a church which was dedicated to serving man in all its circumstances, and this led the mission to overcome an martyr-centric vision centered in original sin. Reviving the teachings of the Father of the Church, Vatican Council II had an approach which was closer to human reality and pulled the stick, called the universal mission as dialogue in Unam Ecclesiam Suam. In Latin America, we do not speak much of dialogue for various reasons, but one of them is the following. You'll note that there's no dialogue possible in a situation of oppression or colonial situation, whereas the church is called upon to listen the call of the poor who call for liberation. There cannot be a dialogue with a subordinate who does not speak. So there is an asymmetrical relationship, and there the aspect of listening and freeing the denied voices comes to the fore. So we have to listen. And fourth aspect, mission has conviviality. Moving from a mission of conquest, which is the colonial mission, to a mission of encounter, involves living together, sharing, knowing people, announcing gospel with testimony and closeness, cooperating with all, non-destruction, economic and social life, and justice, and try to improve the conditions of life and establishing peace in the world. So in this consists evangelization, which Gentes say. Disciples of Christ maintain themselves in a close contact with God, promotes their fraternal unity, taking a more complete path towards God. Paul VI in Evangelii Nuntiandi will say that the plan of creation is in continuity with the plan of redemption.
The mission as synodality is not present in Vatican II, but the whole spirit is there. So the Missio is illustrated as a synodal action in between churches and people. The Missio needs participation. Solidarity means people that have been trained, cooperation, exchange, because all communities need to mutually help and interact, especially the poorest ones. And obviously, this is void of any protagonism, local protagonism. The local church is nonetheless the protagonist of the Missio, no longer the missionary or the church coming from outside. The local church is the protagonist of the mission, and the others, if they're called to do so, will collaborate. So Missio at Gentes today translates into inter-ecclesial missionary cooperation. The sixth aspect, which is very dear to Pope Francis, the outgoing church. The mission entails always have different levels, an intersubjective dimension and a more transcultural one. Now, outgoing and going out of one's own world was never easy for anyone. It's not even that much natural. But the most interesting thing is that going out means that you are faced with a constitutive action of the church. It has to do with its origin, because the church is born going out of the Judaic culture, its own pathway, its own goal. So going out requires a transcendence from oneself and a total detachment from one's own vision, the vision of the world, and from the world of one's relations. So going out is constitutive of the church. Then a seventh aspect, and here I will elaborate a little bit more, it's the mission as a boundary. Now, this going out or forth does not mean, according to Pope Francis, does not mean rushing around aimlessly, nor without significance, but rather going out to others in order to reach the fringes of human life. And there is in the mission its own preferential geopolitics, generally directed towards certain territories. That is, it's not carried out just in any place. The mission is not having just any place. It has its own preferential geography, in other words. The mission needs to be situated, always courageously indicating an extreme, ultimate, borderline and marginalized situation in which the presence and the universal action of the Church has to be concretely incarnated. And then the eschatological situation, which is not only in time, but also in space and across the territory. Now, around these lines of mission, such as essence, service, listening, conviviality, synodality, going out, and frontier, a reconfiguration of the concept of mission is taking place, together with its meaning, its relevance, and its effectiveness between tradition and the new post-colonial times. It is not a matter or a question of answering to postmodernity concerns and its dark side. that is coloniality. It's rather a question of paths that have to be taken together with humanity as pilgrims in search of truth, artisans of peace, and sowers of hope. These paths lead us to inhabit the boundaries of the earth and of the human, and they can be of three types. The boundary can be a margin of a territorial and social environment, a periphery where people are far from the center, but in some way they are part of the same social cultural context. The boundary can be a frontier, a threshold, a line of demarcation between two different territories, two different worlds, two cultures, which then defines different identities and belongings. So margin, frontier, periphery, that's a dividing line. And the boundary can also be a horizon that opens up before us as something which is unknown to us. That is a new path to be taken, a vast and unexplored space. Now, the first type of boundary is the one of inhabiting the peripheries. In the first place, the mission is called to go out towards the territorial, environmental, and existential peripheries that are found at the margin of a social cultural context. The mission, just yesterday as today, is called to inhabit this context because so as to allow the missionary church to experience a fundamental change in its perception of the world. It is an ethical option, which in turn entails an optical option, a fundamental detachment in terms of perception, and the questioning of reality from the point of view of today's victims and today's crucified. So being in the periphery, it's just a way or a perspective from which you look at the world. In this way, the evangelizing action of the Church, extended to all nations, to the ends of the earth, ends up landing in an ultimate, concrete, extreme, forgotten, excluded reality. Then to inhabit means to take part, to be part, to immerse oneself, to touch with one's hand and heart the disenchantment, the divisions, the conflicts, and the lacerations produced by the frontier diaspora, rooted in the history, the body, and the daily life of those who experience and live in the flesh of colonial violence. In other words, we have to let the periphery to inhabit us. The peripheries are not an easy place where to live, because in these confines of the human, Jesus' envoys are called as a penance to take off their sandals and disappear, makes themselves invisible, living and learning to approach the conditions of oblivion, injustice, invisibility, and the ones of the excluded. This closeness invites us to move from the anxieties of salvationism, to the calm of conviviality, switching from heroic voluntarism to the human simplicity of the guest and the pilgrim, from the thirst of conquest to the disarmed gratuitousness, from the presumption of teaching to the willingness to learn. This inner exodus requires not only great generosity and enormous audacity, but most of all, it pushes us to adopt a profound humility made up of listening, attention, acceptance, respect, gratitude, service, so that the silent voice of the invisible, of the discarded ones, the marginalized ones, the excluded one, may emerge, together with their hopes and dreams, to become the subjects of their own history, and thus to arouse the hope in the midst of all the most difficult situations, because if there is no hope for the poor, there won't be for anyone else. What matters today is transforming the signs of the times that we are called to scrutinize in the light of the gospel and turn them into signs of hope in every periphery and in every boundary. Inhabiting peripheries and crossing borders, our borders, without invading the other ones. The border appears in its ambivalence as the protection of one's own identity, belonging, and openness to otherness and difference. On the one hand, it represents the limit within which we are determined, we acquire a form, the end that defines us, or the goal that defines us. On the other hand, it is a place of contact, of transit, of transmission, of transgression. It also becomes a place for weaving and creating bonds, establishing contacts, a place of possibilities, of opportunities, of the unexpected, a place that problematizes knowledge, existence, or faith. Leaving our borders without invading those of the others means that we risk our identity and the sense of belonging in order to become a meeting place ourselves. In the globalized postmodern world, borders follow the furrows of coloniality. Very often, they become cruel, unsurmountable walls that exclude millions of migrants and refugees, as well as invisible, imaginary, symbolic fences for millions of other people. Social classes, ideological segments, interest groups, cultures, races, genders, generations, religions, and every kind of difference. The mother frontier of all frontiers is still today represented by the abysmal line and the structurally asymmetrical relationship between metropolis and colonies, which is consequently reflected in the controversial distinction between post-Christian countries and mission lands. The challenge posed by postmodernity, coloniality, through the Christian mission and participation in the Missio Dei is to ensure that these vertical walls, once broken down, can be turned into bridges of encounter and reciprocity, of listening and learning, of new relationships and new stories. So the mission is patiently called to promote a culture of encounter. Crossing borders doesn't just mean to overcome, to pass, to ferry, but also to intersect, to intertwine, to unite. And to do this, for this reason, it is necessary to inhabit the borderline, to connect a story with the other side of the story, the emancipating conquest of a civilization with the wounds of people that have been crucified, discarded, set aside, denied in their culture and in their life project. Now, this is not about falling into a dystopian proposal of a world which is borderless, conceived into a single direction by neoliberal hegemony, but rather about proposing a perspective of open borders that preserve identities and memories and at the same time promote dialogue, exchange, cooperation, and integration. Now, opening paths. Now, where is the world society going today, and in what direction, towards what end, towards what horizon? The postmodern globalized world seems to have lost sight of its own horizon, reducing its expectations, renouncing or giving up its dreams, living of short-term objectives. And Pope Francis says in Brother All, history shows signs of regression. However, for the missionary disciples, nothing human can look like strange or seem strange. Pope Francis continually invites the Church to overcome temptation, to close in and on itself, and to reactively face the complex problems that exist in today's world. In the first place, it's necessary to bear witness, to seek out and promote fundamental values that transcend every form of consensus and cultural transformation. Values that are ever relevant and never non-negotiable. And as in the case of the inalienable dignity of the human person and the common good, our understanding of their meaning, their importance can increase, and in this sense, consensus is a dynamic reality. But by themselves, they are appreciated as stable values because of their intrinsic meaning. Then in the second place, it is necessary to open up with interest and curiosity to the universal horizons of the people, of other people, cultures, and knowledges. open up to everything, everyone, to what's new, to what's unknown, to the subversive, to the progress of science and technology in the sphere of art, communication, cultural expressions, in the religious and spiritual realm, and in the political and economic sphere, where new recognition and citizen are being claimed. This implies having a heart that knows no boundaries and that is able to overcome differences of origin, nationality, color, and religion, and freeing ourselves from all desire to dominate the others. So it is not a question of promoting an abstract universalism, but rather the one of thinking in terms of a one human family. The foundation is simply human, to realize the worth of a human being, of the worth of a person, and always and in every case. A mission that breaks down and brings down walls and builds bridges always seeks to integrate the local with the global. In the same way, living in a periphery does not just mean absolutizing a local identity cause, but rather fighting against all forms of domination, committing oneself to causes that affect humanity. Conclusions. The ad gentes cannot be just reduced to simply sending people from one country to another, a practice that can still reproduce a colonial mission of conquest and of Western Christian expansionism. Today's message must inspire more deeper, more prophetic and indispensable dimensions for a church that lives and is articulating and expressing itself only outside of itself, realizing a missionary cooperation to the very ends of the earth and until the end of times. In a postmodern world where exclusions are multiplying, abysmal lines are deepening, and perspectives are being blurred, we cannot just afford to give up and retreat into our conventional shells. The Christian mission is called to place itself in a counter-hegemonic perspective, more in the sphere of relationships than in that of actions or virtues. Missionary disciples need to calm down, to run less, spend time with people, fraternize, get together, care for the lives and wounds of today's crucified, because we run too much nowadays. We are always in a rush. We are Formula One missionaries. And can you imagine us as a pit stop during a celebration of Mass, and then we go on just rushing towards what? Now, despite all of the information and the communication technologies and their fascinating developments, the communication network of faith must be human, according to the words of Paul VI, so that the message is capable of reaching the people's hearts. And if there is one thing about the Missio Dei, it is that it will still go on needing and continue to need human warmth. There is a very simple way for people to meet the Lord, and that is through our persons, through our embrace, our witness, our listening, our silence, and our words. And then through the ecclesial journey, the risen Lord reveals himself more deeply in the community, in the word, in the Eucharist, in the sacraments, in prayer. But initially, he is announced by the closeness, tenderness, and by the encounter. This is not a proselytism. This is just sheer heart, pure hearts and pure passion. God-love proclaims itself by loving, not by dint of convincing, never by imposing the truth, and much less by rigidly clinging to some religious or moral obligation. God proclaims himself by meeting people, taking into account their history and their journey. The Lord is not an idea, but rather a living person. His message is communicated through simple, truthful testimony, through listening, through acceptance, through the joy that spreads. The God of hope is proclaimed by living the gospel of charity today. The mission that goes out to the peripheries, that brings down walls, that crosses borders, that opens new pathways to the end of the earth, has to do with the church that we are and the church that we want to be. A church that makes progress and that never roots down somewhere, that evangelizes and it's evangelized, that grows and matures to the extent that it is authentically open to listening to the poor and to others. It is the mission that makes the church and not the other way around. The mission always comes first and above all. In this adventure, the important thing will not be what we will be able to achieve, but rather what kind of church we will truly become. Thank you.
Grazie mille, Padre Raschietti. Prego di iniziare con il nome e la provincia.
Sì, io sono
Congregazione.
Sì, io sono Fra Gioacchino dell'Ordine dei Frati Minori Cappuccini. Si sente? Di Angola. Allora parliamo portoghese. Ho visto bene la presentazione e forse la mia visione è un po' critica. Si è inciampato nella stessa situazione di paesi post-cristiani e paesi di missione. E con tutto lo sforzo bello che sia stato fatto, io penso che oggi le terre di missione anche sono i paesi post-cristiani, no? E questo perché la missione oggi non è solo andare, è perché c'è sempre quel rischio di vedere quando uno parte dall'emisfero sud verso l'emisfero nord verso sud è missionario. Quando uno viene dall'emisfero sud verso nord è collaboratore. Allora, io penso che in questa presentazione c'era tanto di questo rischio. Questo è il mio commento. Grazie.
I'm Matthew from India on Claretian. Two questions. One related to Christianity in Europe. The other one is the periphery missions. We were speaking of the predominant religion, we can say secularism, and we were debating many things. I just want to ask how we understand the presence of Islam in Europe, which seem to also speak of the affirmation of community belongingness against individuality and so on. First question. Second is regarding colonialization, a word used many times. As far as I understand, many of these countries were decolonized years back, maybe 100 and so on. It's not as a slogan because we have native clergy, native bishops, and there is freedom. And how is the weak church here still colonialized? I say this because in India, whenever some political situations come, they speak of the English people they have colonized. They left already 80 or many years back, and now the Indians are in power. But they use the word colonialization to project responsibility outside than assuming responsibility for oneself. Just your thoughts on these two.
Allora, la distinzione tra i paesi, ho messo post-cristiani tra parentesi, si sente?
Sì, sì.
Ok. Ho messo paesi post-cristiani tra parentesi e terre di missione, era dal punto di vista critico, insomma, questo non esiste più. Approfitto anche per fare Cioè, cos'era una volta la chiesa missionaria? La chiesa che non aveva la chiesa e celebrava la messa sotto sai, la pianta lì, qualcosa del genere. E invece la chiesa costituita era la chiesa già impiantata, già con la sua cattedrale, il suo vescovo, il suo seminario, eccetera. Cioè, adesso si parla che tutte le chiese devono essere missionarie, ossia quella chiesa, tra virgolette, minore è diventata modello per tutte le chiese. Tutte le chiese devono essere missionarie, ossia, cioè riflette anche la questione postmoderna, ossia la Chiesa è in diaspora, è una situazione di diaspora. E questo è una cosa che deve entrare. La Chiesa locale, secondo il Vaticano II, sono tutte uguali, non c'è quella di più e quella di meno. Non c'è la Chiesa madre e la Chiesa figlia, non esiste. Questa è stata una conquista, gente. E la protagonista della missione è la Chiesa locale. Questa Chiesa locale ha una missione ad gentes in due direzioni nel suo contesto socioculturale e come cooperazione con altre chiese. Questi sono i suoi due grandi impegni. Quindi quando parliamo di missione a gentes non è la missione fuori, è anche la missione dentro. Questi, tra virgolette, mettiamocene quante ne vogliamo, di virgolette, non cristiani, ce li abbiamo accanto, insomma. Non bisogna mica andare non so dove. Allora, andiamo non so dove come sinodalità, come cooperazione tra le chiese. Ecco. Quella stessa missione che dobbiamo fare nel nostro contesto socioculturale. Questa è un'idea abbastanza assodata, diciamo, in America Latina, meno in Europa, dove la missione a gente è solo farla fuori, insomma, una roba del genere. Quanto alla questione è, la riflessione che abbiamo fatto è a partire da un contesto che è il contesto latinoamericano, me ne guardo bene che sia qualcosa che possa servire ad altri contesti. E la colonizzazione sì è usata molto come scusa per qualsiasi cosa. Anche il razzismo è usato come qualsiasi cosa. Questo non vuol dire che non esista. Cioè c'è stata una decolonizzazione politica soprattutto dopo la Seconda Guerra Mondiale, ma questo non significa che è finita la colonialità. Facciamo una distinzione tra colonialismo storico e colonialità. La colonialità è qualcosa di profondo, gente, che tocca la nostra anima. La nostra cultura occidentale, noi siamo coloniali, siamo razzisti. Se non volete crederci, guardate al bambino Gesù che mettete nel presepio. Va bene? È bianco e deve essere bianco, biondo, coi riccioli e gli occhi azzurri. Io tra tante attività ho anche una piccola fabbrica che sta andando in fallimento, va via, ma di oggetti religiosi in plastico, quella roba. L'anno scorso abbiamo detto facciamo un Gesù bambino nero. Quanti ne abbiamo venduti? Neanche uno. Noi siamo bianchi dentro e proponiamo una religione bianca. Va bene? Non esiste razzismo, al contrario, il razzismo è qualcosa di storico. Casomai ci sarà la discriminazione, eccetera. Un mio confratello che veniva dal nord del Brasile è venuto giù al sud e è rimasto particolarmente sorpreso di vedere poveri senza terra, poveri bianchi e biondi, discendenza polacca, eccetera, quelle robe lì. È rimasto scioccato. Come? Ci sono di poveri bianchi e biondi? Va bene? Sembrava molto strano e gli ho detto, vedi come noi siamo coloniali. Hanno fatto un test con della gente, così ha mostrato una foto con un uomo giovane correndo. Cosa sta facendo? Sta correndo, ma perché? Perché ha fretta. Ha mostrato un'altra foto con un uomo giovane nero. Cosa sta facendo? Sta correndo. Ma perché? Perché è inseguito dalla polizia. Ok? Semplice. E se ci guardiamo bene, dopo va bene, questo razzismo viene fuori in episodi di stupidità che sappiamo, ma in fondo, questo razzismo fa parte di noi. E anche nelle chiese. Cioè, noi proponiamo una liturgia romana per tutti. Là in Brasile ci sta lavorando su un rito amazzonico. Vabbè. Ma la difficoltà di uscire dagli schemi romani, mamma mia, non la difficoltà che può fare la curia romana, la difficoltà che facciamo noi. Cioè, tu devi comunicare con delle religioni che sono sciamaniche, cioè il soprasensibile, mamma mia. Eppure, voglio dire, se tu vuoi incarnare la questione dell'inculturazione su queste cose, devi lavorare su queste cose qua. E noi dobbiamo fare dei passi straordinari, insomma, probabilmente ci vorranno generazioni.
So we thank the Lord for all that we have learned today, all the challenges and questions that have been raised, all the speakers who have made this possible, and the Society of the Divine Word who has gathered us together. And we say together in thanksgiving, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Buona giornata. Grazie.